sometimes when people who think Postgres and they think, wait, pharmaceutical, banking, like can that really, like, is that something you want to put on an open source database? Like,
you almost always start with some basic relational data, like that's your first database, right? And then it's okay, what do I need next? And it's funny because is Postgres full text search as good toe to toe as Elasticsearch? No, but is it 80% of it, and I don't have to run another system? Yes. Is PostGIS maybe as good as the most expensive advanced geospatial? Maybe not, but I already have my data in Postgres, so let me use it. Partitioning, time series, like take your pick. Is it as good as the super special purpose built thing? Maybe not, but is it 80, 90%? And then I don't have to run another system? Like that ops headache is a pain, right? So it really does go quite far. And before I reach for another database, I just say, hey, can Postgres do this? And it's usually, yeah, and it can do it better than I actually thought it could. And Postgres is really unique in that, like, it's no vendor can own Postgres. We talk about open source and like, cool, like there's a bunch of open source databases, but like they're primarily run and maintained by a single company, right? Like most of the commits and contributions come from that company. Whereas Postgres it's much closer to like the Linux kernel, right? Like it's in its core team, there's a charter that no company can comprise more of than 50% of the core team members, right? The core team, I forget if it's 7 people or 9. It's kind of like a steering committee. But if you look at the committers, right, they're distributed across a bunch of companies. Well, we contribute about 1/3 of the code. Like no one's at 50%, and no one will ever get to 50% of the contributions to Postgres. There is something that we're actually launched today that's called the Postgres Playground. Let me see if I can quickly share my screen.
Yeah. All right, and welcome back to the show, everybody. It is great to have you returning as we continue on with our series of databases. We've covered Postgres machine learning, we've covered BigQuery, we've got MySQL Server coming up. We've got all kinds of crazy database stories for us. But today, we've got a very special guest. If you are actually watching this right now with your eyes, you probably recognize my guest more than you recognize me if you are a Postgres fan. But I'm joined by Craig today, which I'm super excited about. Craig, how are you doing today?
Doing good.
Yeah. We were like, we're looking at Postgres, and Hasura has a long history of Postgres users, a long history of working with Heroku Postgres. And we were like, who comes to mind when we think about that is you. And so my boss made the connection very graciously, and I'm super excited to be able to have you on today. For those that maybe are new to Postgres and don't know who you are, maybe you can give a quick rundown on who you are, a little bit about your background with Postgres specifically, and kind of what you're doing today.
Yeah, I'll go back to, I guess, about 12 years or so now. I was one of the first PMs back in the day at Heroku. Didn't go there to do anything Postgres initially at all, actually. Came on board there to launch their Python support, ran their languages team, ran product for a whole bunch of teams. At points, their API team, their CLI team, their add-ons marketplace. But it was funny, I was internally at Heroku, like evangelizing Postgres. Like we had all these internal users, these Heroku devs and these Ruby on Rails devs building Heroku. And they're like, yeah, Postgres, it's fine, whatever. I'm just going to, shove stuff in it. And I'm like, you're kidding, right? Like it's an awesome database. And I accidentally started evangelizing internally about Postgres. And then the GM of that team was like, hey, Craig, you're pretty good at this marketing thing. You should come do it. And I'm like, I'm not a marketer at all. Like, I don't do marketing. And they're like, no, this is marketing. You should come do it. And so ended up recruiting me to come into that team and ended up running, product for that team for most of my Heroku career for 4 or 5 years. And so I think Heroku was lucky in its stumbling on Postgres and why we chose it. It's a great database. But at the time, we had all these Ruby on Rails developers asking for a database, and we thought, how hard could this be? It turns out it was a lot more work than we ever expected. But since that time, went on to Citus Data, which turned Postgres into a sharded, distributed, horizontally scalable database. They were acquired by Microsoft. As part of that, I was running product for all of Azure Postgres for a while. and then kind of ready to get back to building early stage things again. So now for a couple of years at Crunchy Data, I joke that it's kind of unfinished business from Heroku days. Trying to create an amazing developer experience for Postgres is kind of the goal. So hopefully after this, I'll take a break from Postgres, but it's still an awesome database overall.
Yeah. So it sounds like I like that story about, they were like, I don't do like the marketing, and they're like, no, you've been doing that for the last however many years here internally, and so now Postgres is yours. If you're so excited about it, you're gonna make it happen. You have to make it happen. So they handed it to you. That's great. So yeah, you mentioned Crunchy Data, and why don't you give us a quick rundown? What exactly does Crunchy Data do? For those again that are not aware, if you haven't come across one of their tutorials, which are excellent by the way, what does Crunchy Data do in terms of Postgres specifically?
Yeah, so we've been around a number of years, but traditionally very enterprise focused. So we've got large banking customers, large pharmaceutical customers, some very large enterprises that trust us to support them for Postgres, on premise, right? Whether you're running on bare metal, VMs. And so I came on board a couple of years ago to kind of help us expand with a fully managed cloud service. So very similar to Amazon RDS, really with more Postgres power built in. So it's better tuned. You get full Postgres super user. And then, a big thing is the quality of support. I think if you use a major cloud provider, it's not always the best support. Like they'll kind of keep it up, but hey, if you need help with a query, it's kind of, that's your responsibility. Whereas for us, we contribute about 1/3 of the ongoing code to upstream Postgres itself. So I kind of have a who's who of Postgres committers and contributors around me. And our goal is to be like the company that you need for Postgres, right? Whether it's you're running it in Kubernetes, fully managed in the cloud, whatever you need to be able to support you there.
Yeah, because that's a really interesting point, because there are cloud providers, and I'm not going to name anybody specifically here, that have somewhat casually at times referred to some of their database offerings as we had to support Postgres like somehow, and like, but like they were like, well, but a real database or a grown up database, and then they quickly try to shift people over into something a bit more commercial or specific to their platform or their product offering. And I think that having a company, because when people who think Postgres and they think, wait, pharmaceutical, banking, like can that really, like, is that something you want to put on an open source database? Like, I think maybe you can kind of talk about a little bit why you have seen Postgres have that sort of adoption in that space. So we're talking about highly regulated industries. We're talking about places with extremely different looking workloads, like banking versus pharmaceutical, very, very different kinds of workloads. How is it that Postgres has sort of evolved to be this utility knife database, if you will, the Swiss Army database for these kind of workloads? And I think then again, from the perspective of somebody who says, like, we're all Postgres, like it's all we do, really has a lot of value. So how has Postgres sort of evolved to be able, I think you hit on it a little bit when you talked about Citus sort of splitting off into creating a hyperly focused flavor of Postgres for certain kinds of workloads. But like, I'll let you go and expand on that. So why has Postgres sort of evolved, or how has it been uniquely positioned to evolve in supporting these different kinds of use cases?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of credit to what we did back at Heroku. And I think like when you look, like Postgres has a track record of being safe and reliable for your database. And that's kind of the counter path that most databases took, right? Like a lot of databases are like, yeah, we're gonna be really user friendly, but play it fast and loose with data reliability, security, stability, that sort of thing. Like there's a long track record of most databases kind of taking some shortcuts. And a good database it's usually estimated about 10 years to mature. Postgres is coming up on 30 years old now. Like it's been around a long, long time. You look at other commercial databases and they're a fork of Postgres. Look back at Astrodata, Netezza, like its name is Post Ingress. Ingress, one of the oldest, earliest databases, which is like you kind of come from one of two trees, right? And most, or probably half or more, come from that Ingress and Postgres tree. So for a long time, it wasn't user friendly. It wasn't cool and sexy. It didn't have like JSON data types and like window functions. It was safe and reliable for your database, for your data. That's where it started. And Heroku, we really pushed and started to engage with the core community and kind of try to evolve some of that. Small things like letting the libpq protocol just support a DSN, like a database URL, right? Like that wasn't originally in Postgres, and we worked to get it into the wire protocol, which is now you see everyone using this, right? Like here's a database URL that is just a connection string, and you just pass that into your driver, and it's easy and just works, right? So back at Heroku, we invested a lot in getting that user experience, that friendliness there. It started with JSON. Like JSON, we cheated at first, but oh man, we did market JSON. Like it's like here's a JSON database, and all it did was JSON validation and throw it into a text field. That was the first version for 2 years. And then it was like 9.4 came along, and we had JSON B, which is, I think officially stands for binary. One of my colleagues says it stands for better. Like it's a better JSON because it's binary compression on disk, and you can index into it. And so we look at it, it took this path of we're going to be safe and reliable for a long time. And I think I remember a conversation with some they were some ex-Oracle solution architects, and they were over at Salesforce, and they're like, yeah, I mean, this is 10, 12 years ago. I was having a conversation with them, and they're like, Postgres has given them worries. Like they used to be able to just kind of like throw FUD at it and say like, oh no, it's not a real database, it's open source, or it doesn't have this, or it doesn't have that. And it's like, you start to look and it's like, no, it's got all the major features and it's reliable. And now in the last really 5-10 years, can we call a database sexy? Like it's kind of become a sexy database, right? Like when you talk about like JSON B or full text search or geospatial, like, I mean, we were, I think, going back and forth, and you're like, yeah, it's interesting to run it in Kubernetes, but it's also like, oh man, this whole geospatial, like that's a whole other parallel world that's like just as deep as Postgres itself. And it's, I think, undisputed that it's the richest open source geospatial database that exists.
Yeah, I want to hop on that. Not even just for geospatial, but like, so I've talked with a number of users in the science community, specifically Hasura users in the science community, and when it comes to stuff like genomic data, when it comes to stuff like highly relational data or graph data, Sparkle, reigning king, like this is the thing that you need to use. But it's like there's a bit of a barrier, I would say, to adoption for some of these more esoteric databases that are a bit more complex to set up or run. And so one of the things that really made Hasura useful for them was because a lot of cases, their workload would be, well, we want to have the way to browse our data and make these discoveries that Sparkle querying makes easy for us. But all of the data, because Postgres has been open source, because Postgres is free, and you could get it in dirt cheap, aka free flavors from Heroku or other providers in the space. But like, I mean, it became just such a ubiquitous database for, okay, I need to get something that's a bit more full powered than an Excel spreadsheet. And then you would just end up with Postgres databases everywhere. And so a lot of these scientists were tasked with basically trying to transform Postgres data into Sparkle or some other sort of more traditional graph database. And then when they came across GraphQL or even the promise of Hasura, they were like, oh, actually, I can read this like open source free database in a very graphy kind of way. And I can see these relationships, and I can kind of query for these unique relationships in a way that previously I would have had to have put them into something that was much more, again, graph oriented. And I think it's partially because just Postgres was so available and is so accessible that everybody's like, okay, every GUI, every whatever is easy to go ahead and be able to start up. I mean, simple. I want to say simple because easy is one of those words that we want to be careful with. But like, it's very simple for people to be able to get going with, and has then just existed everywhere. I'd say in terms of what most developers have experience with, is probably something kind of like SQLite, and then Postgres. Like it's kind of that progression for a lot of developers in their journey too. And then they were like, well, it hasn't let me down yet. So I'm just going to keep going with it.
You almost always start with some basic relational like that's your first database, right? And then
Yeah.
it's okay, what do I need next? And it's funny because is Postgres full text search as good toe to toe as Elasticsearch? No, but is it 80% of it and I don't have to run another system? Yes. Is PostGIS maybe as good as the most expensive advanced geospatial? Maybe not, but I already have my data in Postgres, so let me use it. Partitioning, time series, like take your pick. Is it as good as the super special purpose built thing? Maybe not, but is it 80, 90%? And then I don't have to run another system? Like that ops headache is a pain, right? So it really does go quite far. And before I reach for another database, I just say, hey, can Postgres do this? And it's usually, yeah, and it can do it better than I actually thought it could.
Well, and that's a solid Hasura pitch right there. Because, like, you take a database that can get you 80% of the way, you put all of the automated, read, write, delete on there, and then you're like, well, I do need this special use case for my product that does differentiate on these axes. And then, well, I can also just write a quick generic function or whatever in an action or an event trigger that'll be able to handle that for me. And then, like, obviously, as the story is expanded, it's like, well, in some cases, yeah, it does make sense to have this very bespoke database. Well, we'll just stitch it into the rest of it, and be able to have access to this whole federated data story. But I don't want to get ahead of our talk here today. It's just it's interesting how Postgres's own vision of we're going to be good enough for probably what you need for a very long time. And then even on top of that, you can still stay within the Postgres world with things like going time series this direction, or going highly transactional this direction, or distributed in that direction. And you're able to get these sort of different flavors that still stay in Postgres and just kind of layer on top. And when you reach the end of those limits to try to optimize something, well, you've gone very, very far in a product story for your company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you used to talk about like the, Rails is the just, I just want to get stuff done stack, right? And I think like you look, hey, in Hasura, and I just want to get stuff done. Like I don't want the shiny new framework this week. I just want to get stuff done and build a product that solves a problem, right? And Postgres and Hasura fit right in there. I have a conversation with someone every week that's an interesting business, and the stack's kind of boring. It's not that exciting. It's like, here's Postgres and Hasura. It's like, I know to some it's really exciting, but like, it's not like we're gluing together this kind of completely new architecture, but it's battle tested, it's proven, it just works. And now I can go build features, right? And functionality and like solve real problems for users, which I love that unsexy approach to systems and architecture. So I can go and build a business and a product and make money and solve problems for my users, right?
Yeah, boring tech is highly, highly underestimated when it comes to. So now I'm gonna put a bit of a spotlight though on it. So we've talked about how Postgres is very user friendly. It's very accessible, approachable. It's ubiquitous. So how does a company like Crunchy Data then survive or exist on essentially saying we're going to go all in on vanilla Postgres? Like when you say this is our core business, we're not creating a highly unique flavor and selling the educational licenses or whatever else. Like why or where has Country Data specifically thought, okay, Postgres as its own thing is worth building an entire company around, and an approach to sort of support and everything else? Like what's kind of the story there in terms of why it's something that you as a company have decided to bet on?
So I both love and hate that question because if you look around, everything's like, we're Postgres, right? And it's like, we're Postgres compatible. And I'm like, that's not Postgres. Like, and if you don't have to look far, like it's everywhere you look when someone says it's Postgres, it's probably not, right? Like vanilla Postgres is really powerful and works, and people still want support on it. It's amazing to me that more people aren't doing this, because I feel like this is what customers want. They show up and say, oh yeah, I don't want this thing that's Postgres compatible. I actually want Postgres. And Postgres is really unique in that like it's no vendor can own Postgres. We talk about open source and like, cool, like there's a bunch of open source databases, but like they're primarily run and maintained by a single company, right? Like most of the commits and contributions come from that company. Whereas Postgres it's much closer to like the Linux kernel, right? Like it's in its core team, there's a charter that no company can comprise more of than 50% of the core team members, right? The core team, I forget if it's 7 people or 9. It's kind of like a steering committee. But if you look at the committers, right, they're distributed off across a bunch of companies. Well, we contribute about 1/3 of the code. Like no one's at 50%, and no one will ever get to 50% of the contributions to Postgres. So from a business perspective, like companies like that, they don't like being locked in. They don't like the Postgres flavor or the Postgres compatible. And I see companies pitch it all the time. It's like, well, we're Postgres, and it's like, no, you're not. And the developers you're talking to see through this. So I don't know why more people aren't pitching vanilla Postgres. Like for us, it works great, and it's I guess I should thank all of them for not going and like dedicating to vanilla Postgres. Right, it gives us a huge opportunity, but it's one that's really working quite a bit for us. And companies like that, no central owner, that no lock-in, but they still want a vendor that they can trust for it. Right, like who do I call when there is a security vulnerability or trust to update the CVEs? Like we've pushed a bunch of the Postgres through common criteria, and a bunch of those, like we see a new report about a supply chain attack every week. Like we build and review every byte that goes into Postgres and build it so you have a trusted supply chain for your database, just like you would from a closed source vendor, but it's open source Postgres you can trust.
That's actually a really interesting angle to especially when it comes to paralleling the Hasura story itself or truly open source core. I think what's the not so there's like a term for products that have a open source path where it's like you can definitely benefit from the commercial flavors that we're offering or somebody else is offering. There's even other commercial vendors offering commercial versions of Hasura these days. But like you can just say at the end of the day, I actually want to have I want to know that I could run this locally. And it's kind of like having a big battery backup, in your garage. Like, yeah, I like the power grid and that's nice, but I sort of want to know that I could also just, go off grid if I needed to, and that would still work. And I think that's something that there is a lot of value there, at least in terms of also, company business planning for stability and whatnot. I'm going to make a very abrupt segue here. I'm going to ask a question that's kind of leading. But like if so we've kind of pitched that Postgres is something that's really worth betting on, and that it handles, I mean, in your case, even vanilla, in your case, it handles workloads from things that are very transactional like banking to things that are very stable or relational like pharmaceutical. Where could somebody go to actually learn more about Postgres? Like what's a recommended resource you would have for somebody these days to learn more about it?
Yeah, so there's a few in there, right? Like I'm obviously biased on like the Crunchy blog. Like it's my approach to I guess I am okay at marketing because my approach is like teach people stuff, right? Like tell them how it's awesome and educate them, right? Like as developers, we love to learn. So like our blog, go check it out, subscribe to it. There is something that we're actually launched today that's called the Postgres Playground. Let me see if I can quickly share my screen. So I guess it was about 6 to 8 weeks ago, I came into a Slack message from someone on one of my teams that said, so I did something kind of crazy over the weekend. And those kind of things, it can go one of two ways, right? It's either really exciting and it's really like, what did you do? And so
or a bit of both.
And so this is what we just launched. Essentially a playground for you to kind of level up on skills. And I'm going to just jump into one of these. And so there's some crazy things going on here that it's like, oh, cool, I've seen things like this. And I've seen, tutorials and that sort of thing. And, this is slightly different where this is Postgres right here running locally in my web browser. So this is not connecting out to another Postgres instance. This is Wasm running in my web browser. And I just loaded up a data set, which is so this is a 538 data set of bursts by day in the US. And so here we can actually walk through live and say, like, I'm going to go and create this table now. So it's in a different format, and I want to kind of roll it up into a date format with Postgres. Actually, did that run both of them? Yeah, so that ran both of them, right? So that insert there. So I created a new table bursts, and then I inserted, and I actually converted this to a timestamp. So I can do like date math on it, whereas it was broken out by integers before. And we can now just go and query this and say, like, give me an example. So you can see, like, here's how many bursts there were that day, right? Nice public data set. And this tutorial, we're actually walking through and showing you a mix of things like the date trunk function, which I love Postgres's built-in functions. Usually if I want to do some like basic manipulation on data, Postgres already has a function. So if you wanted to do like weekly rollups, right? Like this is going to truncate to the week and then group by the week and give me the sum, how many bursts were in a week. And so there we go, right? The weekly bursts from newest to oldest, right? And we're
like that is snappy. Like that's running locally. That's a fast query because the database is sitting like a nanometer
yeah,
in memory away from where you're running the function. Yeah. So like that is crazy.
Tell my fans starting to warm up. It's like, you know, like I opened up Slack and Spotify at the same time, like my warming up. So it's definitely doing some work. But the fact that we're even running Postgres in the browser blows my mind.
That's really crazy. Is that actually code that's been made open, or is that something that you're holding on to, or?
So it's not open. We do have a blog post coming out later this week. We're targeting tomorrow on how we built it. So we're going to kind of walk you through step by step by step. There's some other pretty sweet things about this that all of our tutorials and our data sets are powered by a Notion doc. So like you don't actually have to do a website deploy. You just come in and update the Notion doc to drive all of these tutorials. So we have like a good sense of collaboration. And you can see where, I don't know how good your SQL is. Like we're starting to do some crazy things here with like, this is a CTE. So CTEs are awesome. They're so CTE stands for common table expressions. And do we have some tips over here? We might have some tips over here in our Postgres tips area. So we also have this page, Postgres tips. If you want to learn how to do like a quick how-to thing, like there's a good chance it's in here of like, oh, this is what I need to know, or my common question of Postgres. CTEs are kind of like a view while you're running that query. So it's not like long-term persistent and materialized, but I could do like step 1, then step 2, then step 3. And so here we named the view with weekly bursts, and you see I query from it here as if it's a table. So like I can run this query.
So you're making a subset, you're making like a ephemeral view, and that you're then able to then sub-select from.
On step 1, 2, 3. So you can see all I'm doing is that, you know, grouping there, right? But now I want to do this window function. And here I get into the fun, crazy SQL stuff. So I'm going to copy all this now. And I lag and order by. And so I do this over, which means it's going to look at the row behind it.
Okay.
So I've got like this row, and then I've got this row if they were ordered, and I want to actually compare the results between the two. So if I copy this one and run it, you can, here is the burst this week, and here is the previous week bursts. And here's the burst this week, and here's the previous week's burst.
Then, and if you want to chart that, like if you want to actually put that into something that you want to expose for BI purposes, that's something that is not a unusual request, one that would require normally a fair amount of custom coding or whatever else that you would have to write a bunch of resolvers for. But if you know your way around SQL to be dangerous, you could actually make this be a part of the actual, like just make this be a query that runs, and you can save that and make this become a function that you run on a regular basis.
Yeah. And so I'm going to send you the link in a minute. I want to see if we can take one of these queries and maybe put them into Hasura and see like what we can do with them. Yeah, like this is a super common one where like, you know, if you're not used to SQL, this might look a little intimidating, but I think a developer can parse through and reason about this, you know, with a little bit of work. and basically compute something like a week over week change, right? Like from a business dashboard, what's my week over week growth of signups? What's my month over month revenue growth, right? That's a super common, like when we talk week over week, month over month, like BI
Yeah.
dashboard, you say, right? And there's a little bit of SQL, but maybe a lot less than you would have to do in code to get the same effect. So,
Well, and speed wise, right? Because you're talking about, in this case, at least you're talking about at least two, if not potentially even like multiple round trips to the database if you were doing this inside of a Go, interface or a Python script to go back and forth to try to get this data. But again, if you, for the little bit that would make your product differentiated, you could just either hire crunchy data or you could be able to get this sort of function written and be able to then persist this into a case where this actually gives you an incredible amount of value, because what you want to see is that change over time, especially when it comes to business terms, and that's something that is incredibly valuable. This is an amazing tool to learn. There was a while back and I'm trying to remember the name of the company. They did some kind of a analytics across multiple different connected sources. It was M something, I forget the name of it, but they had a really good Postgres learning course. And but a lot of those cases, they don't actually allow for like deleting or for inserting. It's usually almost always about reading. But here, you should actually have full access to read, writes, deletes. And then if you screw up, basically, I'm guessing just refresh the browser.
completely. Yeah, just refresh. Don't be careful about that, Command R when you're live in a query and DB.
Yeah.
You definitely have thoughts about evolving this, right? About persistence and other things, and how you could bring your own data set, right? Like, cool, I have this cool set of CSVs out and I want to import it into Postgres, right? So we've got a number of different, there's some on the basics of joins, right? And how do joins work? And it's loading up data with a good sample set. A lot of times the hard part of learning SQL is like, okay, well, what's a practical use case? Like computing a week over week difference or month over month difference. Yeah, I get it from an academic standpoint, but like, what's the practical use case? And we've really tried to get some good data sets here that give you that practical use case, even the basics of like working with psql in your terminal, right? So I think a lot of developers are friendly with the CLI, but when it comes to like their Postgres database, they're not. They're like, I'm gonna go back to my GUI tool. Like psql is a really great like /d will describe all the tables in the database for me. So you can do you can see I've got a weather table here. I can then do /d plus weather to like show me the layout of that table. You can set like how your nulls display. Like I actually have my nulls in my SQL terminal locally as a ghost emoji. I also love like the poop emojis instead of like blank. Like how do you know it's a null versus an empty text, right? You can /x auto to like pretty display the output. So based on the width of my screen, this should I think it's a little off in here. Normally it'll display in like a nice like wrapping, that sort of thing. Timing will show me, let me just run that same query from before. How long that query took to run, which that's pretty sweet.
Which is crazy useful. Yeah, because that's a Postgres unique feature, right? The analyzing function that is able to kind of tell you how long things took and how the query was actually created.
So yeah, I mean, my hope is Postgres is an awesome database, and we're trying to highlight just a little bit more of that why and how. I know most people, a lot of people love Postgres, but are a little scared of it, right? It's if I gave you the query to determine bloat, it looks a little imitating. Or if I ran something like here, I'll run a crazy query just for fun that looks like this, which is a recursive CTE query. Any guess what this is going to output? Any guess at all?
Where's the show me is this the full query here on multi-lines?
Yeah, that's it right there.
Okay, so you're selecting a bunch of floats, multi-point data. Oh boy,
So
no,
this
I'm
one's
gonna.
gonna be a little slow. This one's stressing my browser a little bit. It's gonna go in a minute.
I feel like this is gonna just print a giant poop emoji as potentially that.
I, that's my next one I'm gonna work on. I haven't gotten that one down yet.
Like, but I mean, first of all, the site looks great. By the way, this is a really nice looking place. But like you were saying, though, when it comes to Postgres and Postgres education, there's kind of two folds of things happening here, right? One is demystifying, right? So take a developer like me, totally self-taught, like on the journey, and I've gotten myself to the point where I'm relatively confident with copy paste code because like I can kind of grok a little bit what's happening. Did we get a Christmas tree?
Let's see. Let me change my browser a little bit.
Yeah.
We got a Mandelbrot, all out of a couple on SQL.
Very nice.
It took a little bit longer, but
Yeah. That's great. So when it comes to demystifying, what's happening and how this is working, this is empowering people as a whole to be able to embrace Postgres and use Postgres, for meaningful projects. It benefits as well, like for people who do know what they're doing, to be able to be like, Postgres actually is able to do all of these things, and like this thing that we actually rely pretty heavily on and we haven't migrated away from X other database we've been using for a long time. You know what? They like here it's easy to discover and say, actually, it's really straightforward. We probably could or should just go ahead and do the migration to this new system. So this kind of education first approach really does help nail down this sort of confidence level that developers will have to be able to go forward with. And this is an amazing option. I'm envisioning a world where one day we'll be able to get a connection string back out of that. Like, you have one browser open over here with your sandbox, and then you can kind of just put it over into a sandbox to Hasura or something. That would be amazing.
Yeah, we've definitely thought like, okay, how far can we take this, right? Like it showed up, about 6 weeks ago of I did something crazy on the weekend, and I'm like, okay, that's crazy. And then I, paused and thought about it. And I'm like, actually, this is pretty exciting, right? And I think that, like you say, that education journey, right? Like, cool, you want to know why Postgres. Like, here's something that you can, from a business standpoint or from a technical standpoint, right? Like, arrays are awesome. Range types, super valuable. Like, have you ever done like calendaring where like you don't want to like have a person be in a class that overlaps with another time? Like with range types, you have a from and a to period in a single data type, and you can have a database constraint to guarantee like they can't overlap, right? Or that we only have 30 people in this, class, like guaranteed data consistency things. Extensions are huge, like transactional DDL. Like this is one of those things where if you ever run a migration on certain databases and it like broke mid migration, like you're left in a broken state. Like half the rows have this column and half don't. And Postgres will automatically roll that back, right? We talked about JSONB, like really rich indexing, like listen notify is pub sub in your database. And we definitely want it to be a journey where if you like start on that high level, like, cool, I hear Postgres is cool. Tell me why, right? Now, which thing do you want to drill into, right? Is it, hey, let's drill into, I hear partitioning is interesting. Let's take a look at it and really, dig in and get started and understand the basics. And then if you already know exactly what you want to do, but where's the tip, right? Like check out our Postgres tips. Like here's a tip on how to do, this partition pruning or that sort of thing. So really kind of a step 1, 2, 3 for wherever you are in your journey is our goal.
And I love the illustrations too. It's really nice because I'm a highly visual learner, and so being able to see these kind of analogies of what's actually happening is super super useful. I mean, this really is. It does make a lot of exciting opportunities for Postgres. Not, I mean, again, it's open. It's something that people can really put a lot of. You can contribute to it. Nobody can own it. Nobody's going to turn it off and or try and make it commercial in a little bit. We've seen that happen with other database providers in the past where, it went really commercial for a while and then it kind of lost some of that early love that a lot of developers had for it. This is really a great way to be able to understand and learn more about it, because when I mean, I'm going to speak from the Hasura side, but like, to really be able to leverage and get the best out of Hasura, it really is a database story. So if you're able to optimize your database, partition it correctly, you're able to expose the right kind of functions, do get a right level of indexes going, finding that balance between what it is you want to make, unique versus accessible, whatever you want to do. That Hasura is just going to expose how good your database is. And when you set up a good database, like, this is really, if you want to really master Hasura really well, you want to get really good at Hasura, you need to get good at databases. If you like really want to go to that next level, Hasura will take any database and it'll give you like enough to be spitting nails pretty quick, and you can move fast. And I want to show up, like, I want to test out that one query you did, that overage. I want to kind of make that into a custom function. But like, if you actually take that data and you learn how to make your database even better, it's just going to pass through and make your experience with Hasura that much better, because you can just continue on. And I think that's a really powerful thing. I'm gonna actually share my browser here, and
yeah, that's spot on.
Good.
Like the basics of Hasura with any database is the same basics, but then like you want to go to that next level, right? It's cool. Let's go to the next level with Postgres, and it permeates right up through Hasura, right, and into your app, and you can take advantage of all those powerful things.
Yeah. So I've got here the database. So you made a copy of the database, and you gave me a connection string, which again, that wire protocol is just amazing, because it's like, here, connect to the database, and you can just hand somebody the string. Which, don't do that to just anybody. Friends don't let friends share database connection strings. So we have that connection here. I'm going to go ahead and track these tables real quick. And what I wanted to do is go ahead and actually track that one function that would expose that overage view, because that might be something that I want to run on a regular basis and be able to expose to my users, in this case, or BI, for example. So I'm going to go to the API window here, data window, and go to the SQL view here. And that was a test to make sure we had content. So I've copied the SQL statement here for the view. So let me see if I can paste it with formatting. I'm not sure if I can. No, it's going to just put all one line for me. So we have the with weekly births, and that was the whole thing that we saw. I'm going to just paste the URL back over here, so we have a way to reference it again, just so everybody kind of sees what it is we were looking at. It's this one here, right? So it's this idea of the multiple.
If you copy that there, that might preserve the formatting for you. I would actually grab the one above it, I think, because this is only going to give us one result. So you may want the other one to like future chart. Yeah.
This one here.
Yeah. And so I wouldn't do the copy button, because I think for the, a WASM Postgres terminal is awesome and powerful, but has quirks and limitations with line breaks. So I think if you copy that way.
Hey, look at that. All right. So let's go ahead and try to run it first, just to see if we get the actual results we're looking for. And so we've got the. Did it run? So it's actually still running. There we go. So we got the week, and we got the births, and we've got the previous. So obviously the first one would be null. That makes sense. And then we have the week over week. So let's see if we can actually go ahead and track this. I think, do I need to make this actually as a create function statement? Probably. Let me see if I, that's just going to save it in metadata, I think. Yeah, I probably have to wrap it in a create function statement. Let me just see if it does it automatically. All right, on to put in a create function. So we're going to go off the rails here a little bit. So we're going to go to Hasura create function. Better docs here. So I'm going to grab this this console statement here. So we have this create function, and we're going to see what we can do to adapt this here. So we have create function. We'll go ahead and call this something like week over week. And we don't actually need to pass in any text here, so I should be able to just remove the parameter make it empty. So this is where I'm going to need some SQL help here. I could look at the tips and
Yeah, I
tricks
think
as
empty's
well.
fine there. Yeah, like empty works.
And then we are going to return a set of, right? Because we have the actual data. And it's going to be, what's the table called there? It's selecting from just the US births. So it's a set of that, or is it a set of the actual view that we have?
It's a set of the actual view, so it's like a new thing.
So it'd be the set of the of what's the name of the view created? The weekly births here?
Yeah. We may end up needing to create some new type there, but let's give it a shot. It might work.
And so I'm going to go ahead and grab this whole select statement here. Actually, it's with, I need to include the with statement there. So come into here. We're going to remove all of that. So we have the interior, and do I need to return the $$ with how was that before? Let me just have a quick look. So it was I think it just returns it by default. So we can try that and see what happens here. I'm going to go ahead and run that statement. Type weekly births does not exist, so we need to create the type there. Yeah?
Type.
Do we do that above here, above the create function statement?
Good question. I am not sure.
Let's have a quick look here, see if we have that inside of the Hasura docs. So create table. Let's see if we have somebody with the a lot of Postgres stuff there. So if the set of table does not already exist on your function, or your function needs to return a custom type, i.e. a row set, create and track an empty table with the required schema to support the function before executing the above steps. So we need to create a special
just a new table.
Cool. A new table with the shape of the thing. So we can go ahead and tell it to, that's probably above here, right?
Yeah, so just create table.
And probably the weekly births is what we're going to call it.
What did we in the, yeah, weekly births works. Let's call it week over week births.
And then with the create table statement, it's just directly parentheses there, right? Or is it the?
Yeah, that's fine. And
so
then
what did we return? We had a date there. Is that a date? Is that a timestamp or what is that?
Yep, week as timestamp. And then we can just do burst as int and prev underscore burst as int. You don't need the as there. Just, yep.
I was going to say, that's new to me.
It should give us the table that we can then map it into.
Okay, let's go ahead and try that. And though, do I need to actually return? Do I need to return the week over week births?
Yep.
So return set of, and then like this, yeah?
Yep.
And weekly births is the view. Okay, so that should potentially work. So let's go and try running that. It does help to have a SQL expert on the call. So in theory, we were able to go ahead and create that function. So we're going to go ahead over now to our section here. So we have an untracked function now. So we can go ahead and track this table first, and then we can track the function. So let's go ahead and see the week over week. So we can track that now. We'll go ahead and add that as a root field in this case. Did I accidentally? Oh, it navigated me after tracking. So I'm going to go ahead and track that. Adding as a computed field. Now we're going to add that as a root field for now, and then we'll be able to just expose that inside of our API. So we have this now. We'll go back to our API Explorer here, and so now what we're able to do is actually expose everything that we have. So if we look at the week over week, we should be able to get the exact same data. So I'm going to look at again. It was the births followed by previous births followed by births total. So I'm going to actually I think I have the data.
The first one's there, week.
Okay, there we go. So we'll move that up one here, just so we have our guaranteed shape of response. All right. And there we have our nice JSON data ready to go for our Google Studio, whatever. So, I mean, that was like, obviously it took a little bit of fiddling. I was able to, we took information from the functions here, and we had to just put it inside of a function wrapper, which the Hasura docs handle us just, fine there as well. We actually have our own Postgres learning course I want to just give a quick shout out to as well underneath the resources. There's some information in there that helps you kind of learn more about Hasura in context of, or Postgres in context of Hasura. But if you wanted to get some more Postgres information about how it kind of plays best with that. But then we were able to just create that function, and now we have something that we could ship to our team that would want to use that and be able to expose this. And if we needed to, we could actually even take this one step further, because typically our VI team, they're not going to be writing GraphQL necessarily just yet. We're a bit too early on the adoption curve for that. So we'll say something like query week over week, and we'll just restify that real fast. We'll call this the week over week query. Make that a GET request, and we'll just call this week over week. And then we would have this REST endpoint here that we'd be able to actually pass to our BI team, and they'd be able to get the same data, which is a super helpful thing that a lot of teams might need, is to take a specific query. And there, with just a few clicks, we've been able to take a learning from the Postgres course there. We've been able to add that directly to our data set. It helped the example matched one-to-one to our schema, but we were able to take that learning and put that inside of this this tool here, and then we were able to actually even use GraphQL or just restify that specifically, which that's actually a really amazing journey there, to be able to then get that into a really production ready way, add permissions, add anything else you would need to be able to ship that.
Live debugging included, where we weren't sure exactly what we were doing. It didn't rehearse exactly right. So it's less than 30 minutes to start on how does this work in Postgres, to, like you say, accessible to your BI team, right? And we took hey, this maps directly to our schema. Even if you didn't have something that mapped directly to your schema, right? Okay, signups week over week, I'm sure is a super, super common metric. So this, you get how this maps directly to that, right? And what's our growth?
That's really a valuable thing. So I have a question then for specifically for somebody with your background then. So here we've taken, we talked about Postgres, and vanilla Postgres is really this great thing, and SQL is obviously the language of Postgres. So where, from your perspective then, where's the value prop of then being able to wrap something like GraphQL on top of SQL? Because if we look at the under the hood, we can see exactly what Hasura is doing when it makes these queries. We can see, sorry, this is where I wanted to be. If I go back to that query view here, and we see that query, we can actually analyze what's happening under the hood and see, okay, we're just wrapping things to GraphQL here. Where do you see that as a benefit? Do you see that as a distraction, or what's your perspective on then the SQL to GraphQL engine here, if you will?
SQL is super powerful. It's not always super user friendly, right? And it's, people don't want to spend every day down in it, but I think you don't have to just shy and scare away from it. It doesn't have to be scary and intimidating. You can, use it for what it's good at, right? Which is aggregating, reporting on data. But then you're not gonna, a front end developer isn't gonna interact with raw SQL. It's just not gonna happen. 10 years ago, younger me thought, hey, people should learn SQL, right? Every engineer should learn SQL. I As much as I think it's valuable and I encourage devs to learn it. Like, you learn SQL, you'll be like the one person in your company that has like a magic superpower, right? It's like, oh, that's the SQL person. Like, they can do this in SQL. That's like, you don't have to be a
And
principal
marketing
level.
will bother you.
Yeah, so it's definitely one of those skills that not enough people have, but also like making data accessible is super important, right? So as much as you can have a person that knows the SQL, and then cool, let's expose this and how the developers want to work with it, right? Whether it's a GraphQL or REST API, like that's how apps are built these days. So I think it's a great win for anyone in their career to go and build some skills in SQL, but most people in your company aren't going to learn it and be experts at it. So exposing the data to them in their way is, straightforward and makes sense.
Yeah, and I think in particular also because it allows you to add the layer in between where you're able to introspect what does the data model look like. So this ability to have like a self-aware SQL of sorts is really helpful, right? Because it kind of is like, well, what else exists there? And SQL is kind of like guess.
Yeah,
And
it's
with
all those
GraphQL, it's like here, yeah.
yeah, the layers we went through, right? Well, here's the basics, the query, the groups by week. Now we added a CTE to make that easier, and now we added the window function. Okay, cool. We've got all that, and here's the SQL data. Now, how do I actually map that to my data model, right? So my app understands it versus saying, here's the results of the query and visualize it, right? Now it's a typed object, right? Now it's a week over
Yeah.
week birth, and we
Yeah.
have that trusted kind of typed object through the chain. But we started, which is a basic select star of like, what's the data look like? Now, how do we map this in a structured way?
Yeah, absolutely, and it allows then the data engineer and the backend person to be able to say, this is our main value prop that we have, and we want to say, okay, here we're going to expose these pieces, we're going to auto generate these things. The front end has access to those fields, and we're able to get that value provided into the system. But then we're not exposing, because I mean, if you expose SQL to the front end, you could probably expect having a bad day. um, and so having this sort of a buffer in between where experts are able to come in and say, okay, this is how we want to handle this case with GraphQL. In our case, we want to do these things. We want to add these bits of data. And then we're going to put this protection around it that's able to say, if you're able to see it with this introspection and this typed object, like you said, then you're able to use it underneath the permission scope that you have. And I think that is really, really a valuable. That's why I think that GraphQL has its place on top of SQL. Now, obviously, I'm a bit biased because I get paid to think that too, so it is helpful. But no, I think this is what's really crazy. Like I was saying again, learning SQL has its place, and it's really, really valuable because doing like what we just did with that function inside of a Node.js wrapper or a Go wrapper, which you can do in an action, requires a lot more database interaction and a lot more queries. And it's not something that you necessarily need to do. You can just expose that from the actual raw database through this language that it's been speaking and been developing for the last 30 years. And then you can just pass that right along and say, okay, now we're going to actually grab this in a way that teams from BI to the front end are able to use. And that's actually super cool. So, yeah, I think that's pretty cool for the show. I would love to get from your side maybe three points or three things that you would recommend people have a look at for GraphQL or for Postgres, and yeah, three quick tips for people watching today.
Yeah, I think one, check out some of our content on Crunchy Data, right? Whether it's the playground if you want to come and like practice your skills, or like Postgres tips for quick reference, or our newsletter, right? Like there's a lot of content on how to do this, how to debug, performance issues or understand what's going on, right? Those 101 things to the advanced level. Postgres Weekly is a great like newsletter resource that's kind of curated, not targeted at DBAs, but targeted at like app developers, right? Like whether you're working with Hasura, you're a Node developer, you're a Rails developer, like the content there is more targeted at that audience than it is the DBA audience. So Postgres Weekly is a great resource. And I mean, like keep an open mind when you're like, hey, I wonder if Postgres can do this. Like, go check. It probably can. I think that's the biggest thing is you don't have to be scared of it. Just give it a shot, and it'll take you pretty far.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much for joining us today, because I was really I mean, that new tool, you're calling it what again? Are you calling it the playground? It's called
Yeah,
the
it's basically a Postgres playground to come in and kick the tires and have some fun.
So it's just crunchydata.com/playground.
Yep.
And definitely have a check that out. That's going to be a great place to level up your skills. Have a look at our Learn course if you want to learn more about wrapping, stable functions for some of these things that you can learn at the Crunchy Data course to be able to expose those inside of Hasura. That's going to do it for this show today. Again, thank you so much, Craig. And thanks for being a friend of the community for so long, and for helping Postgres just continue to be an awesome database. So we appreciate the work you guys are doing. And that's going to be it from this side. Any last things that you want them to, where can they find you on Twitter?
Craig Kerstiens. You probably can't spell my last name easy, but it's you search for it, you'll probably find me.
We'll put it in the descriptions, and everybody can find you.
Yeah, you can find me there and Crunchy Data pretty easily. So it was a lot of fun. So thanks for having me.
All right. We're going to wrap this call for this week. Have a great day, everybody, and we'll see you for the next episode.